In the middle of the square, 3 tall Apache women were tied to 3 upright wooden posts under the blazing afternoon Sunday. Their bodies were solid, as if carved from bronze, broad shoulders, muscular arms, and sun-darkened skin covered in bruises. Villagers stood around them, shouting, "The demons have returned. They carry the curse of the Red Mountains." A man holding a torch stepped forward, his hand trembling, but his eyes burning with hatred. Then a gunshot rang out, shaking the entire square. The torch dropped and went out in the sand. From the porch of the saloon, Jack Harlan stepped out slowly, silver hair, weathered leather coat, Winchester rifle in hand. His eyes were cold, his voice gravelly. "Let them go, if there is any curse here. It is your cowardice." Silence fell over the crowd. The wind kicked up dust. Jack walked forward and drew a knife to cut the ropes. The first woman dropped heavily, like a felled tree. She tried to push herself up, her deep black eyes looking at him. Not with hatred, only exhaustion. He cut the other 2 free. With every slice of the blade, a sharp snap echoed in the heart of a man who had lost his wife and child to the flames long ago. When the 3 large bodies collapsed onto the sand, Jack let out a long breath. The wind blew through Dust Hollow, carrying ash, dust, and the beginning of a truth no one had dared to speak of for 20 years. Night rain poured down as if trying to wash away every trace of blood and dust. Jack Harlan's wooden cabin stood isolated at the edge of town, where wild grass reached up to the knees and the sound of wolves howling mingled with thunder and lightning. He lit a fire in the stove, the dim yellow glow casting light over the 3 massive bodies lying stretched out on the floor. The 3 Apache women, Nahara, Ciala, and Tomaya, were still unconscious. On their shoulders, backs, and wrists were deep purple welts from the ropes. Jack took off his coat, tore it into strips, and cleaned their wounds using the bitter liquor he usually kept to help him sleep. The scent of blood, sweat, and smoke mixed into a heavy, metallic odor. After a while, the largest of the 3, Nahara, stirred faintly. Her thick eyelids lifted, and her gaze, sharp as a blade, reflected the firelight. She spoke in broken English, her voice hoarse. "The fire. It was not from the gods. It was from men." Jack paused, turned to look at her. "You remember?" She did not answer. She simply closed her eyes again, breathing hard, sweat pouring as if she had just escaped a burning dream. By midnight, as the wind howled through the cracks in the door, a faint moan came from the corner of the room. It was Ciala, the youngest. Her eyes still shut, lips trembling. "Go deeper. Make it quick inside." Jack froze, thinking she was talking in her sleep. He gently pulled the blanket over her and let out a quiet sigh. War and torture, he thought. Some wounds run so deep, even dreams do not dare to touch them. He sat by the door looking out into the rain. In the sound of the wind, he saw again the face of his wife and the darkened hands of his young son. Both had died in the mine fire 20 years ago, the same fire the villagers called the fire curse, though he had always called it the cowardice of men. Nahara opened her eyes again, her voice rough. "Why did you help us?" Jack replied slowly, without turning around. "Because no one ever saved my wife and son. Maybe I owe God one saved soul." She looked at him for a long moment, as if she understood everything he did not say. The wind picked up, and the fire in the stove flickered, casting its glow on the strong forms of the 3 women, the ones who had once been hung for a curse that never existed. Outside, Dust Hollow was as silent as a graveyard, but inside that small wooden cabin, the fire still burned, steady, gentle, like the spirits of 3 women being brought back to life. And in that soft golden light, Jack Harlan's weathered face seemed to hold something he had lost for 2 decades. The belief that, sometimes, fire can also save. The next morning, Dust Hollow was once again drenched in sunlight. But in that sunlight, there was something suffocating, like the whole town was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible. Word spread faster than the wind. Old Man Harlan is hiding 3 Apache witches in his house. In front of the saloon, a few men whispered, their faces flushed with whiskey and fear. "They are going to summon a rain of blood. I saw it myself. One of them has the eyes of the devil." Within just a few hours, The crowd had gathered armed with guns and torches heading toward the cabin where Jack had lived alone for 20 years. Inside, Nahara sat sharpening a short blade, the flash of steel flickering in the shadows. Ciala and Tomaya watched through the window, their eyes tense. Jack calmly lit a cigarette, the smoke curling into the air like morning mist. He said quietly, "They will come." Nahara looked up. "Are you afraid?" Jack answered, his voice dry as old timber. "I am, but fear does not mean we have to run." Shouts echoed in the distance, mixed with the sound of horses and crackling torches. Jack stepped out onto the porch, Winchester slung over his shoulder, his eyes cold and clear. The crowd stopped 10 paces away. A bearded man shouted, "You are hiding demons in there. Let them out." Jack exhaled smoke, staring directly at him. 20 years ago, you said the same thing, and my wife and son burned alive in the mine because of your words." The man faltered. Someone in the crowd looked down in shame. Jack continued, his voice low and steady. "You never buried the truth. You only buried your fear. If you want to burn 3 more innocent people, go ahead and shoot. But make sure you do not miss, because I will not stand still." A dry wind swept through, kicking up clouds of dust. The first torch flickered out, then the second, and the third followed. A horse neighed loudly. A flock of crows burst into the air from the graveyard behind town. A strong gust of wind blew through, scattering old mud, stained newspapers' headlines reading "Fire Curse of Dust Hollow." The crowd slowly began to retreat. No one dared look back. Jack watched them go, slowly resting the rifle on his shoulder, his eyes fixed on the eyes of a man who had survived too many fears to still believe in devils. Inside, Nyada asked softly, "Will they come back?" Jack replied, "Not today. The wind has chosen a side." Then he closed the door, leaving the howling wind outside, carrying with it the rumors, the fear, and the lies, all slowly dissolving into dust. Inside the old wooden cabin, only the fire remained flickering across 3 sun-darkened faces, 3 souls just saved from execution, and a man who had finally found a reason to stand up to an entire town. 3 days later, the sky over Dust Hollow turned gray, as if covered in ash. Jack Harland and the 3 Apache women rode deep into the western mountains, the place where, long ago, a mine had been buried in the blaze known as the Fire Curse. The trail was rough, rocks crunching under the horses' hooves. A faint scent of sulfur still lingered in the earth, like a wound that had never healed. They stopped in front of a crooked cabin nestled between stone ridges. A thin stream of smoke rose from a bent chimney. A thin man with long silver hair stood at the door, his eyes sunken like coal pits. Silas Crow. Jack spoke first, his voice low. "We came looking for truth, not trouble." Silas looked at the 3 tall women behind him. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, an old hurt, like seeing ghosts from the past. Silently, he invited them in. Inside the old shaft, a flickering oil lamp cast shadows across a worn leather journal lying on a cracked wooden table. Jack opened it. Page after page filled with faded writing, smudged with dark fingerprints of coal. August 14. There was no curse. Just cheap dynamite and greed. The mine owner wanted more yield, ignored warnings about weak tunnels. People needed a demon to blame. They chose the Apache tribe. And they chose fire as proof. Jack gripped the journal, his hand trembling slightly. He remembered the night the mine collapsed, his wife screaming in the smoke, his young son trapped beneath a beam. For 20 years, he believed fate had cursed him. Now he knew it was not fate, it was man. Nahara spoke softly. "I heard stories like this, but I never believed them. Now I know. The real curse is the lie." Silas sat down, poured corn whiskey into a clay cup, his voice rough as dry soil. "I was the one holding the detonator that day. I knew the truth. But if I spoke, I would be killed. So I stayed quiet. 20 years of silence, and I can still hear the screams." He looked straight at Jack. "You think saving these 3 women will cleanse the past?" Jack replied slowly, eyes fixed on the lamp. "No. But at least I will not die one more time in silence." Silas sighed, his gaze heavy. "Truth does not save anyone. It just keeps you awake at night." Then he closed the journal and slid it across the table toward them. The lamplight flickered, casting its glow on sun-worn faces strong and tired. Outside, the wind howled through the mountain cliffs like the cries of ghosts still wandering beneath the earth. But this time, the wind carried no scent of sulfur, only the scent of truth, dragged up from the damp, heavy depths, and real enough to hurt. I am deeply grateful for your presence here. If this story brought back old memories, those dusty afternoons, the echo of horse hooves beating in your heart, then subscribe to my channel, so each day we can sit together again. And I will tell you another tale from the West. That night, they camped beside a dry creek bed. The sky was full of stars, but the wind carried a dry heat, like the breath of ashes from a mountain long since gone cold. Jack lit the fire, its glow casting flickering light across the faces of 4 people, 3 Apache women with sun, darkened muscles and sharp black eyes, and an old man whose heartache had long since carved itself into the lines on his weathered face. Nahara sat in silence, holding a silver necklace etched with the shape of an eagle, the only thing left from her mother, who had died in the dust mine fire. The silver caught the firelight, and to Jack, it looked like his own memories were being reflected back at him. He asked softly, "How long have you kept it?" 20 rainy seasons, Nahara answered, her voice low. My mother said, "When the fire lights up again inside someone's heart, throw it away. Is it time now?" She nodded. No one said another word. Nahara stood, her bare shoulders broad and powerful like bronze sculpture. She stepped toward the fire, clutching the silver necklace in her hand. The wind picked up. She murmured something in Apache, an ancient prayer only the wind would understand. Then she tossed the necklace into the flames. A flash of silver shot upward, bright and brief, then vanished like a falling star. Siala bowed her head. Tomaya placed a hand over her chest and whispered, "There's nothing left to be afraid of." Jack stared into the fire now, whirling with silver sparks, ash rising and circling around them. The scent of burning silver mixed with wood smoke and damp earth. For a moment, he felt as if Dust Hollow itself had started to breathe again. From a distance, Silas Crow stood watching. He did not step into the light, only observed. The fire reflected in his old, deep, and lonely eyes. He spoke quietly, his voice carried on the wind. "Maybe. I have waited 20 years to see fire lit the right way." Then he turned and walked away, his silhouette fading into the night like a shadow of the past, finally willing to let go. Nahara knelt, her large hand gathering the silver ash. She let it fall through her fingers, smiling softly. "My mother said fire knows when to forgive. Now it does." Jack looked at her and said slowly, "Maybe. Fire was never to blame. Maybe people just lit it the wrong way." The wind swept stronger, lifting glowing embers high into the night sky. The 4 of them sat still, the fire shrinking low, leaving behind only warmth and the gentle flicker of light. In that silence, they did not know those drifting silver ashes had carried away the curse that had bound Dust Hollow for 20 long years. Dawn poured over the mountains like honey flowing across stone. After the night of fire, no one said much. They packed up camp in silence, saddled the horses, their eyes carrying the weight of people who had just crossed into another life. The wind carried the scent of fresh ash, the smell of things that had burned away but still left warmth behind. On the road back, they passed through a dry field once the edge of the old mine. The earth was still cracked, black like charred coal, but between those cracks, the first green blades of grass had begun to rise. Jack pulled his horse to a stop, looked down, and smiled softly. "Even the land knows how to forgive." Niara replied, her voice low. "The land forgives. People do not." That evening, they returned to the small wooden house where Jack had lived alone for 20 years. He walked into the stable and unlocked a stall that had been closed for a long, long time. Inside stood a large black horse, tangled mane, bright eyes still, and silent like a statue. Jack reached out, stroked its neck, and spoke gently, almost to a spirit. "Do you remember, Shadow? It has been 20 years. And I have not ridden you once." The 3 Apache women stood just outside the door. Nahara stepped forward, her hand resting on his shoulder, broad, warm, and solid like mountain rock. "Who did you keep it for?" Jack looked out into the empty space where the sunrise had just faded and answered slowly, "For my son. He died in the mine collapse. He was 16. I promised him I would teach him to ride this horse, but he never made it to the saddle." A quiet pause. The wind passed through, jingling the reins. Then Nahara said, "Teach me. If you can teach an Apache woman to ride a white man's horse, maybe your son's soul will finally be free." Jack looked at her tall, sun-darkened eyes as deep as red earth and nodded. That afternoon, the four of them led the horse out into the field. Jack showed Nahara how to hold the reins, how to feel the horse's breath through her knees. Each time she lost balance, he would murmur, "Do not try to control it. Just let it move. As long as you keep looking ahead." Siala and Tomaya sat on the fence, watching, sometimes laughing when Nahara tumbled into the grass. She would get up, wipe the sweat from her face, and smile, a flash of steel beneath the Sunday. By sunset, Nahara finally held her balance. The black horse galloped in circles across the field, dust flying, her leather jacket soaked in sweat and streaked with dirt. Jack stood in the middle, watching, his eyes lit with something that had been dark for 2 decades. When Nahara came to a stop, he said, voice thick with emotion, "You did it. If my son were alive, he would be laughing just like I am right now." Nahara stepped down and walked to him, speaking softly. "You taught me how to ride. But what you really taught me was to stop being afraid of falling." That night, they sat together around the fire. Siala played a bamboo flute, the soft notes echoing like lullabies from the mountains. Tomaya lay back, staring at the stars, and said, "Maybe our spirit never left. Maybe they were just waiting for someone brave enough to light the fire at the right time." Jack smiled faintly, the firelight dancing in his tired eyes. "You have already lit it." Outside, the night wind blew past the porch, carrying the distant sound of a horse's whinny. The house, once a refuge for a broken man, now echoed with laughter, with fire, with the voices of women telling stories about land, about blood, and about belief. And in that sound, the old soul of Dust Hollow seemed to begin learning how to breathe again like true survivors. 3 days later, the valley wind grew gentler. The sky was so clear you could see the veins of light etched across the clouds. Dust Hollow, after 20 years of living in fear, fell into a different kind of silence, not the lurking kind, but one that listened. Jack Harland led his horse out from the stable, the saddle newly mended by Nahara's hands. The 3 Apache women, Nahara, Siala, and Tomaya, stood waiting at the scorched clearing that once marked the edge of the mine disaster. They wore new leather dresses, still rough, still weathered but catching the sunlight in a bronze-like glow. They looked like statues carved from the desert itself, fierce, beautiful, and solemn. Jack mounted his horse, his eyes sweeping across the land that had once burned his life to the ground. Black rocks, deep pits, all now covered in a soft green moss. He said quietly, "I used to think this place only knew how to take. But now I see. It gives back too. If you know how to live right." Nahara replied, her voice deep and warm. "The land does not hold a grudge. Only people do." They rode across the dry grassland, where the wind carried both the scent of dust and the promise of new grass. Siala lifted her head and smiled faintly. "We will tell Apache children that once, a white man stood alone before a crowd to save 3 women from the noose." Jack turned to her, smiling softly. "And I will tell the children of Dust Hollow that 3 women walked out of fire and taught an old man how to believe in people again." Tomaya raised her face to the wind, her black hair lifting in the breeze. "If any child asks what a curse is, we will say it is when people choose to believe fear over truth." Jack nodded, his eyes lit beneath the sunlight. His gaze no longer held pain, only the rare peace of someone who had finally laid down his burden. The wind rose again, scattering old ash around them. In that breeze, the 3 women held their heads high, and the old man watched them in silence, feeling something strange. In them, he saw the shapes of his wife, his son, and the part of himself he had thought was lost forever. At the last hilltop, they came to a stop. Nahara looked to the horizon, where the sky met the land in a silver line. "From now on, we are no longer the hanged. We are the ones who hold the wind." Jack nodded. "And I am just the one the wind chose to forgive." The 4 of them looked down toward the valley where the old wooden posts had fallen, erased by time and wind. And in that moment they knew, none of them were victims anymore. They had become the ones who carried light through fire. That morning, The dawn rose slow, golden and gentle like the earth taking a fresh breath. After a long night, Dust Hollow no longer smelled of smoke or fear, only of wet grass and cold wind. The wooden rooftops, damp with morning dew, caught the first rays of sunlight, and the old chapel bell rang faintly, as if waking from a 20-year sleep. On the dusty main road, Jack Harland rode out in front, his faded coat fluttering in the breeze. Behind him, the three Apache women, Nahara, Ciala, and Tomaya, rode side by side, tall, strong, and steady. Children peeked from behind doorways, their eyes curious more than afraid. An old woman whispered, "They are not demons, they are survivors." Jack stopped his horse at the square, the very place where he had once fired his rifle to save them. The old wooden post was still there, now just a broken, rotting stump. He dismounted and slowly pressed the last stake into the earth. On it, he placed a small piece of silver, the final ash from Nahara's necklace. Nahara knelt beside him, her large, sun-worn hand covering his old one. "The fire is at rest now," she said softly. Jack replied, "No, it just moved. Now it burns in us." They stood there for a long time, until the wind began to rise. Silver ash from the necklace swirled into the air, glittering in the morning sun, then faded, drifting toward the red horizon. It looked like 1,000 tiny stars, small, but carrying the forgiveness Dust Hollow had waited 2 decades for. Ciala took Tomaya's hand and smiled. "They will say we carried the fire away from here." Tomaya answered, eyes lifted to the sky. "No, fire never belonged to anyone. It only comes to those brave enough to keep warm, not to burn." Jack looked at the three of them, 3 powerful figures, warriors, and the beautiful scars of this land. He spoke, his voice thick, but warm. "If there is another life after this one, I hope I get to be the father of women like you." Nahara turned to him, smiling gently. "You already are, Jack Harland. We just came a little late." They rode out of the square just as the sun crested over the hills. Light shone through the horses' manes, through rising dust, through the 3 figures carved like bronze. In the wind, the chapel bell rang again for the first time in 20 years, not because of fear, but because of peace. And at the edge of Dust Hollow, where old ashes met new light, people said, when the 3 Apache women rode past, the fire beneath the ground finally stopped growling, and the wind began to sing. "My friend, kindness does not turn back time, but it does stop old wounds from bleeding. In a land once scorched by fear and hate, even a single act of saving someone can change the wind, can turn old ash into light. Kindness is not about forgetting the past, it is about facing it without fear. Because sometimes, it is the smallest flame of compassion that can heal a broken heart and help an entire town remember how to believe in life again." Thank you so much for being here with me, dear audience of Wild West storytelling. I truly hope you are safe and well wherever you are, whatever you are going through. I love you all. Let me know how this story made you feel. Drop a comment down below. Type 1 if this story spoke to you. And do not forget to subscribe for more powerful tales from the Wild West.